The rain did not fall upon Oakhaven. It hammered it. It was a cold, driving deluge that swept down from the jagged peaks of the Silver Creek Canyon, rattling the shingles of the town hall and turning the unpaved overflow parking lot into a slurry of mud and oil. Inside the hall, the air was thick, a humid soup of wet wool, stale coffee, and the electric tension of 300 people holding their breath. The radiator pipes in the corner clanked rhythmically, like a prisoner dragging a tin cup across cell bars. But no one was listening to the building. All eyes were fixed on the stage. Elias Thorne sat in the very last row, his back pressed against the peeling wallpaper. He was 72 years old, and he felt every minute of it in the deep, aching joints of his knees. He looked out of place, a relic carved from rough-hewn timber in a room that was desperately trying to veneer itself in chrome and glass. He wore his Sunday best, a flannel shirt buttoned to the collar and a tweed jacket that smelled faintly of cedar shavings and pipe tobacco, but his hands betrayed him. They were massive, calloused paws, stained permanently with the walnut ink of his trade, resting uneasily on his lap. He watched the young man on the stage with a gaze that was not hostile, but deeply, profoundly weary. Marcus Vance was everything Elias was not. At 28, the lead structural engineer for the state infrastructure project moved with the frictionless grace of a man who had never had to force a warped board into place. He wore a navy suit that seemed to repel the humidity of the room, his hair parted with geometric precision. He stood before a massive projection screen, the blue light casting a halo around his silhouette, making him look less like a builder and more like a prophet of the new age. "Ladies and gentlemen of the council, citizens of Oakhaven," Marcus began. His voice was smooth, trained, projecting to the back of the room without the aid of the microphone that stood before him. "We have lived in the shadow of fear for too long. For 50 years you have crossed the Silver Creek Gorge on a structure that belongs in a museum, not on a highway. You have listened to the wood rot. You have felt the sway in your gut every time a storm rolls in. You have prayed your way across that ravine." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elias saw heads nodding. He saw Mrs. Gable, the school bus driver, clutching her purse tight. She hated the old bridge. Everyone did. It was a wooden truss bridge built by Elias's grandfather, a masterpiece of 1920s timber engineering, but time and neglect had turned it into a skeleton. It groaned. It shifted. Terrified them. Marcus clicked a remote in his hand. The screen behind him shifted from a grim, black-and-white photo of the rotting wooden bridge to a dazzling, high-definition 3D rendering of the proposal. The room gasped. It was beautiful. It was alien. "I present to you the Silver Creek span," Marcus said, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. The image rotated slowly. It was a beast of white steel and concrete, a cable-stayed marvel that shot across the gorge like a laser beam. It didn't look like it touched the earth. It looked like it conquered it. The cables fanned out like the strings of a celestial harp, gleaming in the digital sunlight. "This is not just a bridge," Marcus continued, stepping closer to the edge of the stage, his eyes scanning the faces of the town council members who sat at a long table, mesmerized. "This is a statement. It is constructed from high-tensile carbon steel, reinforced with a polymer concrete composite deck. It is lighter than wood, yet stronger than granite. It is designed to withstand a Category 5 hurricane, a 9.0 earthquake, and the heaviest freight loads legally permissible on American roads." He clicked the remote again. A complex diagram of vectors and load distributions appeared, a web of red and green arrows. To the layperson, it looked like magic. To Elias, it looked like a cage. "The secret," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "is in the rigidity. The old bridge failed because it moved. It flexed. Over time, that flexion tore the fibers of the wood apart. My design utilizes a proprietary locked-node welding technique. We don't bolt these girders. We fuse them. We create a single, monolithic spine of steel. It does not bend. It does not sway. It is absolute stability." Mayor Sterling, a man whose face was perpetually flushed with the anxiety of re-election, leaned forward, tapping his pen on his notepad. "And the wind," Mr. Vance? You know the stories. The canyon wind is peculiar. Marcus smiled, a dismissive, charming curl of the lip. We have modeled the wind, Mr. Mayor. We have run thousands of simulations. Computational fluid dynamics. The wind at the gorge averages 30 miles per hour, gusting to 60. The aerodynamic profile of this deck acts like an inverted wing. The harder the wind blows, the more it presses the bridge down, locking it tighter to its foundations. Nature is just another variable, and we have solved for X. The applause started slowly, initiated by the developers in the front row, then swelling as the relief washed over the townspeople. They wanted this. They wanted safety. They wanted to stop being a backwater town with a rotting bridge and become a modern city with a steel spine. Elias felt the vibration of the applause in the floorboards. He looked at the screen, at the red lines representing the locked node system. He closed his eyes and saw the gorge. He didn't see numbers. He saw the way the mist curled at dawn. He heard the way the wind screamed when it was forced through the narrow neck of the canyon. How it didn't just blow, but pulsed. He stood up. Took him a moment. His knees popped audibly. He was a tall man, towering over the seated crowd, and as he stood, he cast a long, ragged shadow against the back wall. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, waiting. The applause died down, unevenly, as people turned to look. A few whispers broke out. "It's old Elias," someone hissed. "Sit down, Thorne," someone else shouted from the darkness. Mayor Sterling squinted against the stage lights. "Elias? Do you have a question? We are nearing the vote." "I have a concern," Elias said. His voice was deep, gravel rolling in a cement mixer. It wasn't polished like Marcus's, but it carried a different kind of weight, the weight of oak and iron. Marcus Vance looked up, shielding his eyes with one hand, annoyed by the interruption but maintaining his professional mask. "Mr. Thorne, is it? The carpenter?" "That's right," Elias said, shuffling sideways out of the row, moving toward the center aisle. He walked with a slight limp. "I've built half the roofs in this town, son. I know how things stand up, and I know how they fall down." "I'm sure you do," Marcus said, condescension dripping like syrup. "But we are talking about steel, not 2x4s. Elias stopped in the middle of the aisle. The crowd parted slightly, giving him a wide berth. "Steel is just earth that's been cooked, Mr. Vance. It still has a memory, still has a soul." A few people giggled. Marcus smirked. "A soul. I see. I didn't realize we were conducting a seance. I thought we were building infrastructure." "You talk about rigidity." Elias ignored the insult. His eyes locked on the engineer. "You talk about locking the nodes, fusing the spine. You say the wind averages 30 miles an hour. But have you ever stood in the middle of that gorge in November?" "I have the meteorological data from the last 20 years. Marcus tapped his laptop. "Data?" Elias spat the word out like a cherry pit. "Data doesn't tell you that the wind in Silver Creek doesn't blow straight. It twists, corkscrews. It bounces off the canyon walls and hits from beneath. It breathes, son. It has a rhythm." Elias raised his hands, mimicking the shape of a structure. "My grandfather built that wooden bridge loose. He used bolts, not welds. He left gaps in the joints. When the wind hits that wood, the bridge groans, it shifts, it dances a little. It lets the wind pass through. It bows so it doesn't break. And that is exactly why it is condemned." Marcus shot back, his patience thinning. "It is structurally unsound. It stood for 100 years. Elias's voice rose, cracking like a whip. The room went silent. "It stood because it was humble. Your bridge, this monolithic spine, it's arrogant. If you make it too stiff, if you don't give the wind anywhere to go, the wind will find a way to take the bridge apart. You are building a sail, Mr. Vance, not a bridge. And if you lock those joints, when the vibration starts, it won't have anywhere to bleed off. It will feed on itself." Marcus sighed, stepping away from the podium to address the crowd directly, turning his back on Elias. "This is the problem with nostalgia. It blinds us to progress. Mr. Thorne is a master craftsman of a bygone era. I have seen his cabinets. They are exquisite. But you cannot frame a suspension bridge like a kitchen table. The phenomenon he is describing, resonance, is basic physics 101. We have dampers. We have aerodynamic fairings. The science is absolute. He turned back to Elias, his expression hardening. Go home, Elias. Let the professionals handle the heavy lifting. Stick to your birdhouses. The room erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, nervous laughter. The sound of people desperate to side with the winner. They wanted the shiny future, not the warnings of a dusty old man. Mayor Sterling banged his gavel. Order, order. Elias, thank you for your poetic input, but we have a schedule to keep. Elias stood there for a long moment. He looked at the faces of his neighbors. He saw the fear of the old and the greed for the new. He looked at Marcus Vance, standing tall and victorious in the blue light. He realized then that he wasn't fighting a man. He was fighting the hubris of an entire generation. The wind doesn't care about your math, Elias said softly, so quietly that only those closest to him heard. And it doesn't forgive. He turned and walked out. He didn't stay for the vote. He didn't need to. He heard the cheer erupt as he pushed open the heavy oak doors of the town hall. Motion passed. The sound chased him out into the night. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the world slick and black. The air was cold, biting at his exposed skin. Elias walked to his truck, a rusted 1984 Ford F-150 that had more Bondo than paint on the fenders. He climbed in, the springs squeaking in protest, and sat in the dark cab. He lit a cigarette, the flare of the match illuminating the deep lines of his face in the rearview mirror. His hands were shaking, not from age but from a terrifying certainty. He knew wood. He knew that if you fought the grain, the wood would split. He started the engine, the truck coughing to life. As he pulled out of the lot, he looked toward the canyon. In the darkness, he couldn't see the gorge, but he could hear it. A low, moaning whistle as the wind threaded the needle of the cliffs. It was a warning. Weeks turned into months, and the seasons ground forward with the inevitability of a glacier. Winter stripped the trees bare, leaving the landscape gray and skeletal, and then spring erupted in a violent burst of green. Throughout it all, the noise from the canyon never ceased. The construction of the Silver Creek span was a spectacle of industrial might. It was a war zone of progress. The quiet solitude of the valley was shattered by the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of pile drivers and the high-pitched whine of heavy machinery. Great yellow cranes, like prehistoric birds, perched on the edge of the cliffs, dipping their long necks down to retrieve buckets of earth and stone. Elias tried to ignore it. He buried himself in his work. He took on a commission for the St. Jude's restoration. 6 rows of pews, solid white oak, hand-planed, no sanding machines allowed. It was brutal, physical work, the kind that made his muscles burn and his mind go blank. He loved the oak. It was difficult wood. It was stubborn. It had a closed cellular structure that made it nearly waterproof, rot-resistant, and incredibly dense. When you struck it with a chisel, it didn't chip. It resisted, pushed back. But every afternoon, the wind would change. Around 3 o'clock, the thermal currents would shift. The cool air from the high peaks would collide with the warm air rising from the valley floor. It was the Oakhaven breath, the locals called it. One Tuesday in late April, Elias was in his shop, a converted barn that smelled of sawdust and linseed oil. He was running a jointer plane along a particularly knotty board. SHHHHK. SHHHHK. The sound was meditative. Then he heard it. It wasn't a sound from the shop. It was a sound from the valley, 3 miles away. A metallic clang, followed by a deep, reverberating hum. Elias stopped. He set the plane down. He walked to the large bay window that overlooked the distant construction site. Through his binoculars, he watched. The bridge was taking shape. The main pylons were up, towering concrete obelisks that pierced the sky. The steel deck was being assembled piece by piece, extending out over the void. It looked magnificent. It looked strong. But Elias focused on the cables. The stay cables were currently being strung, thick ropes of braided steel wire. Even from this distance, he could see them vibrating. Not a gentle sway, but a tight, high-frequency shudder. "Too tight," he whispered to the empty room. "You're stringing it too tight." He saw a figure walking along the suspended catwalk, a tiny speck in a hard hat and safety vest. It was Marcus. Elias could tell by the posture, rigid, commanding. Marcus was stopping at every junction, checking the sensors, looking at his tablet. He was checking the numbers. Elias lowered the binoculars. He felt a phantom pain in his chest, a heaviness. He knew that Marcus was seeing zeros and ones, green lights on a dashboard. He wasn't feeling the bridge hum. The seasons pushed on. Summer arrived, baking the mud into concrete hard ruts. The bridge was completed. The final gap was closed. The golden bolt tightened with a ceremonial wrench that was gold-plated for the cameras. The asphalt was laid, smooth and black and perfect. The date for the grand opening was set for the 4th of July. A poetic choice. Independence Day. Freedom from the old, rotting past. The town was in a frenzy of preparation. The high school marching band was practicing in the football field, their drum cadences drifting up the hill. Bunting was being stapled to every telephone pole. Mayor Sterling was already rehearsing his speech in front of the mirror. Elias received an invitation in the mail. Heavy cardstock, embossed with silver foil. "The honor of your presence is requested." He threw it in the wood stove. He watched the silver foil curl and blacken, the paper turning to ash. "I won't watch it," he told his dog, a sleepy old hound named Buster. "I won't watch them celebrate a tombstone." But he knew he would go. He had to. It was a morbid curiosity, the same instinct that makes people slow down to look at a car crash. And deeper than that, a nagging sense of responsibility. If the wind did what he thought it would do, someone needed to be there who knew how to listen. The morning of July 4th dawned hot and still. The air was heavy, saturated with moisture. The sky wasn't blue. It was a bruised purple, the color of a hematoma. The weather forecast called for scattered thunderstorms, the kind of generic prediction that meant the meteorologists had no idea what was coming. Elias dressed slowly. He put on his work boots, lacing them tight. He put on his heavy canvas overalls. He didn't dress for a party. He dressed for work. He went out to the truck. In the bed, the leftovers from the church pews were still piled up. Blocks of white oak, ends and cutoffs. Heavy, dense, jagged pieces of wood that he hadn't had the heart to burn. He looked at them. "Just in case," he muttered. He threw his heavy sledgehammer into the back, the metal head clanging against the wood. It was a 10-pound maul, the handle polished smooth by decades of sweat. He drove down the winding road toward the canyon. The air conditioning in his truck was broken, so he rolled the windows down. The air was stiflingly hot. As he approached the bridge, the scene was chaotic. Cars were parked for miles along the access road. Food trucks were selling hot dogs and funnel cakes. A stage had been erected at the near end of the bridge, draped in red, white, and blue. The bridge itself was gleaming. It looked impossibly slender. A silver ribbon stretched taut across the gaping mouth of the earth. Elias parked his truck in the mud, far back from the VIP section. He got out and stood by the tailgate. He didn't move toward the crowd. He just leaned against the warm metal of his truck, crossed his arms, and waited. He watched the flags on the stage. They were hanging limp, dead still. But then he saw the trees on the far side of the canyon, near the peaks. The tops of the pines were moving, just a twitch at first, then a bow. The wind was waking up. Elias looked at the bridge. He closed his eyes and placed his hand flat against the ground. He could feel the vibrations of the crowd, the marching band, the heavy generators. But underneath it all, he felt something else. A low frequency, a shudder in the earth. The bridge was already trembling. It was subtle, invisible to the eye, but the ground knew. The steel was tight, tensely awaiting the strike. Marcus Vance was on the stage now, shaking hands, smiling for photos. He looked triumphant. He had conquered the gorge. Elias lit a cigarette, his hand shielding the flame. The smoke didn't rise. It drifted sideways, pulled toward the canyon. "Play the music, Marcus," Elias whispered, smoke curling from his lips. "But remember, the wind leads." The first gust hit the bridge deck with a sound like a whip crack. The heat on the bridge was oppressive, a physical weight that seemed to press the air out of the lungs. It was not the clean, dry heat of the high desert, but a sticky, suffocating blanket that had risen from the river far below, trapping the smell of fresh asphalt and cheap cologne against the skin. The sun, hidden behind the bruised purple clouds, diffused its light into a glaring, shadowless gray that made everyone squint. Mayor Sterling stood at the podium, his knuckles white as he gripped the sides of the lectern. He was 20 minutes into a speech that had been scheduled for 10, his voice booming through the PA system, bouncing off the canyon walls and returning as a distorted echo. Sweat had begun to map the geography of his hairline, trickling down past his ears, but he smiled the frozen, desperate smile of a politician who knows the cameras are rolling. Behind him, the high school band stood in formation, their uniforms slowly turning into torture devices, the brass instruments dull in the flat light. Marcus Vance stood to the mayor's right, his arms crossed, his posture rigid. He was the only person on the bridge who didn't seem to be sweating. He was watching the sensors on his tablet, a cascade of green numbers that flowed like water. Load distribution, nominal. Tension, nominal. The bridge was holding the weight of the crowd, nearly 400 people, without a murmur. It was a vindication. Every number was a testament to his intellect, a silent rebuttal to every old-timer who had whispered that steel couldn't tame the Silver Creek. But Elias Thorne was not looking at the mayor, nor the band, nor the gleaming scissors resting on the velvet pillow. He was leaning against the rusted tailgate of his truck, 300 yards back, watching the air. The wind had arrived. It didn't come as a gust. It didn't announce itself with the bending of trees or the scattering of leaves. It arrived as a pressure, a sudden drop in the atmospheric weight that made ears pop. The flags along the suspension cables, which had been hanging limp and lifeless a moment before, suddenly snapped. It was a sharp, percussive sound, thwack, 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 like a deck of cards being shuffled by a giant. They didn't flutter. They stood straight out, pointing rigidly toward the north, frozen in the stream of air. Elias tossed his cigarette onto the wet ground and ground it out with his heel. He felt it through the soles of his boots first. Not a shake but a buzz. A low-frequency vibration that traveled up through the rubber, into his shins, settling in the pit of his stomach. It was the feeling of a machine waking up. On the stage, Mayor Sterling paused. The microphone let out a high-pitched squeal of feedback, causing the front row of dignitaries to cover their ears. "Sorry about that." The mayor laughed nervously, tapping the mic, "As I was saying, this structure represents the unyielding spirit of Oakhaven. Just as this steel does not bend, neither do we." He was interrupted by a sound that didn't belong to the human world. It started as a hum, low and mournful, emanating from the massive steel cables that fanned out above them. It was the sound of wind moving over a cylinder, the Aeolian tone, but amplified to a terrifying volume. The bridge was singing. It was a C-sharp, deep and resonant, a note so pure and loud that it seemed to vibrate the very fillings in people's teeth. Marcus Vance frowned. He tapped his screen. The wind speed sensor read a steady 38 miles per hour. It was well within safety limits. The bridge was rated for 120, but the data on the vibration sensors was doing something strange. The green numbers were flickering yellow, vortex shedding. Marcus whispered to himself, his brow furrowing. The wind wasn't just blowing past the bridge. It was curling around the aerodynamic fairings of the deck, creating alternating low-pressure vortices on the top and bottom. Down, down. It was a rhythmic plucking like a finger on a guitar string. And the bridge, the monolithic, locked-node spine of steel, began to answer. At first, it was subtle. The horizon line behind the mayor seemed to dip slightly, then rise. It was a gentle, oceanic motion, almost hypnotic. The crowd didn't panic immediately. They looked at each other, confused. Was this normal? Was this part of the engineering? "Mr. Vance," The mayor's voice wavered. He looked back at the engineer. Marcus? Marcus didn't answer. He was staring at his tablet, his eyes widening. The frequency of the wind shedding matched the natural frequency of the bridge structure. It was the nightmare scenario every engineer learns in their first year. Resonance. The force of the wind was small, but it was pushing at the exact right moment, every single time, feeding energy into the system. Like a parent pushing a child on a swing, a small push at the top of the arc makes the swing go higher and higher. But this swing weighed 4,000 tons. It's locking up? Marcus breathed, the blood draining from his face. The joints, they aren't damping it. Suddenly, the gentle sway turned violent. The center span of the bridge heaved upward. It wasn't a vibration anymore. It was a launch. The deck rose 3 feet in the air in a single fluid motion, then crashed down. Boom! The sound was like a cannon shot. The impact threw Mayor Sterling off his feet. He tumbled backward, colliding with the drum kit of the high school band. The cymbal crashed, a comedic punctuation to a horrifying moment. Then the screaming started. The crowd, realizing that the solid ground beneath them had turned into the back of a bucking animal, surged. But there was nowhere to go. The motion of the bridge became chaotic. It wasn't just moving up and down. It began to twist. Torsional flutter. The north side of the deck rose while the south side plummeted, tilting the road surface at a sickening 20-degree angle. People slid. The folding chairs in the VIP section clattered across the asphalt like spilled teeth, sliding toward the railing. A woman in the front row shrieked as her purse slid through the gaps in the balustrade, plummeting 300 feet into the gorge below. Get off! Get off the bridge! Sheriff Miller's voice tore through the air, amplified by his bullhorn. But he was struggling to stand himself. He was down on one knee, clutching the railing as the world tilted. The noise was deafening. It was a cacophony of human terror overlaid by the mechanical screams of the bridge. The steel girders, welded tight in Marcus's locked node design, were grinding against each other. They couldn't flex, so they screamed. It was the sound of metal being tortured, a high-pitched shriek of molecular bonds being stretched to their breaking point. Marcus Vance fell to his knees. He dropped his tablet. He watched it slide away from him, the screen cracking as it hit a curb. He grabbed the leg of the podium, anchoring himself. His mind was racing, frantically trying to recalculate to find the error. The damping coefficient was 0. It should be enough. Why is the energy accumulating? Why isn't it bleeding off? He looked up and saw the main suspension cable above him. It was whipping. The massive steel rope, thick as a tree trunk, was drawing figure eights in the sky. It's too stiff, Marcus yelled, though no one could hear him. It's fighting itself. The bridge heaved again, this time violently to the left. A section of the ceremonial bunting tore loose, whipping into the crowd like a lash. The panic turned into a stampede. People were crawling over each other, clawing their way toward the abutments on either side, desperate to reach the static earth. But the movement was mesmerizingly rhythmic. Twist, down, twist, every 4 seconds. It was a heartbeat of destruction. Elias Thorne was moving. While the rest of the world was running away from the center, Elias was fighting his way toward it. He had left the safety of his truck the moment the first heavy boom echoed off the canyon walls. He didn't run with the speed of a young man, but with the momentum of a falling tree. He lowered his shoulder, plowing through the terrified spectators who were fleeing the entrance ramp. "Out of the way!" he roared, his voice deep and commanding. "Move!" He reached the edge of the bridge just as the torsional wave hit the abutment. The expansion joint at his feet, a metal comb designed to let the bridge expand in heat, was snapping open and shut like a bear trap.
Bang.
Clack bang. Elias stopped for a second, timing it. He watched the steel teeth separate, revealing the dark drop to the river below, and then slam shut with enough force to sever a limb. He waited for the open. He jumped. He landed on the moving deck, stumbling as the asphalt tilted beneath him. It felt like walking on the deck of a ship in a hurricane, but worse, because the motion was wrong. It was jerky, mechanical, angry. He looked toward the center of the span, 200 yards away. That was the epicenter. That was where the energy was converging. He saw the crowd thinning out as they scrambled for safety, leaving behind a debris field of shoes, hats, and overturned chairs. And in the middle of it, he saw the young engineer. Marcus was frozen. He wasn't trying to run. He was kneeling in the center of the road, staring at the main girder assembly, looking like a captain going down with his ship. He was paralyzed by the shattering of his reality. Elias adjusted his grip on the handle of the sledgehammer he carried. The heavy iron head weighed down his right arm, a familiar, grounding burden. He had a block of white oak tucked under his left arm, pressed against his ribs, a cubic foot of solid, seasoned timber. The bridge rose again, higher this time. Elias had to drop to a crouch to keep from being thrown over the side. The wind howled past him, tearing at his hat, stinging his eyes. He could hear the steel screaming. It was a specific sound, the sound of the main longitudinal girders binding. They were welded into a rigid box frame. As the bridge twisted, the box was trying to remain square, but the forces were warping it. The energy was bouncing back and forth between the nodes, amplifying with every second. It needed a release. It needed a circuit breaker. Elias forced himself up. His legs burned. His heart hammered against his ribs, fluttering like a trapped bird. 72 years old, he thought grimly. I'm too old for this. But he looked at the steel. He looked at the way it was vibrating. He understood it. He didn't know the differential equations, but he knew tension. He knew that when you trap a force, it becomes a bomb. You have to give it a door. Hey! Elias bellowed, fighting the wind. He stumbled forward, using the railing as a handhold. The metal was vibrating so hard it numbed his fingers. He reached Marcus. The young man looked up, his eyes vacant, filled with the gloss of shock. It's failing, Marcus whispered, his voice thin. The harmonics is going to shear the bolts. It's going to collapse. Elias grabbed Marcus by the lapel of his expensive suit and hauled him up. The bridge bucked, throwing them both against the center median. It ain't gonna collapse if you stop crying and help me, Elias shouted, his face inches from the engineers. Listen to me. The duralumin girders. Where do they meet? Where is the friction point? Marcus blinked, the fog clearing slightly. What? The noise. Elias pointed with his hammer toward the center connection. A massive junction of steel plates that was screeching like a banshee. The screaming right there. That's where it's fighting, isn't it? That's the node. Marcus looked. He saw the two massive I-beams sliding past each other, millimeter by millimeter, metal grinding on metal. The welds were holding, but the steel itself was warping. Yes, that's the central splice. But it's welded. It's choking. Elias spat. It's trying to move and you won't let it. We need to wedge it. We need to break the rhythm. Wedge it? Marcus looked at the block of wood under Elias's arm. With that, that's insane. The shear forces are in the millions of pounds. It will vaporize that wood. This is white oak, boy, Elias yelled, the wind whipping his gray hair across his face. It's stronger than you think. And it gives. It'll take the hit so the steel don't have to. A massive crack echoed through the canyon. A bolt shearing off somewhere overhead. Pinged off the asphalt like a bullet. We don't have time for a debate. Elias shoved the sledgehammer into Marcus's hands. The engineer nearly dropped it, surprised by the weight. What are you doing? Marcus cried. Elias didn't answer. He turned and looked at the gap. The central expansion joint, the one place where the bridge was designed to have a fraction of movement, was slamming shut with every oscillation. But because of the twisting motion, it was misaligned. The steel teeth were catching, locking, and then releasing with a violent shudder that sent shockwaves back down the spine of the bridge. That was the pulse. That was the heartbeat of the resonance. If they could soften that impact, if they could cushion the blow, the rhythm would break. Elias climbed over the Jersey barrier. He was now standing on the very edge of the open joint, peering down into the dark machinery of the bridge's underbelly. When I tell you, Elias yelled back at Marcus. "You hit this wedge. You hit it like you want to kill it." "Elias, no. It's too dangerous." "Do it." The bridge rose. The air pressure dropped. The entire structure seemed to inhale. Elias saw the gap open, 6 inches of space between the grinding steel jaws. He dropped to his knees. He took the block of white oak and positioned it over the gap. His hands were trembling, but he forced them to be still. He was a carpenter. He knew how to place a joint. The bridge reached the apex of its sway. For a split second, everything was weightless. The screaming stopped. Then gravity took hold. The 4,000 tons of steel began to fall back down, the gap closing like a guillotine. "Now!" Elias screamed, his hands holding the wood in the path of the closing jaws. "Hit it!" Marcus Vance, the man of science, the man of numbers, looked at the old carpenter holding a piece of a tree inside a machine of death. He looked at the hammer in his hands. He didn't check a simulation. He didn't run a calculation. He screamed, a primal, terrified sound, and swung the hammer with everything he had. The arc of the sledgehammer was not a graceful thing. It was a desperate, jagged blur of motion cut from the gray fabric of the storm. In the hands of Marcus Vance, a man whose life had been defined by the delicate precision of decimals and the sterile quiet of laboratories, the tool looked wrong, like a sword in the hands of a child. But fear is a potent tutor, and adrenaline is a fuel that burns without prejudice. As Marcus screamed, the sound tearing from his throat raw and unpracticed, he didn't aim with his eyes. He aimed with his terror. The 10-pound iron head came down. Wham! The sound was not metallic. It did not ring. It was a dull, sickening thud, the sound of blunt force trauma meeting resistance. The hammer struck the end of the white oak block just as the bridge began its downward plunge. The timing was accidental, a miracle of chaos, but it was perfect. The bridge, a 4,000-ton creature of steel and concrete, was in the middle of a torsional convulsion, its northern flank twisting downward to close the expansion gap. The steel jaws, the serrated teeth of the expansion joint, slammed shut. But they did not meet. They met the wood. Elias Thorne felt the impact travel through the block, up his arms, and explode in his shoulders like a grenade. He was kneeling on the wet asphalt, his chest pressed against the Jersey barrier, his hands holding the wood in place with a suicidal grip. When the jaws clamped down, the shockwave nearly dislocated his elbows. He gritted his teeth so hard he felt a molar crack. Again, Elias roared, though he couldn't hear his own voice. The world had dissolved into a singular, vibrating frequency of pain. The block of oak was screaming. It wasn't a metaphor. As the millions of pounds of compressive force bore down on the wood, the fibers were being crushed. The air pockets inside the cellular structure of the tree were exploding, creating a high-pitched whistling sound that hissed through the gale. The wood was fighting. It was dying, but it was fighting. The bridge shuddered. The rhythm, that deadly, perfect sine wave of resonance, hiccuped. The steel had expected to slam into steel, to bounce that kinetic energy back into the structure to feed the next cycle. Instead, it had bitten into something that didn't bounce back. It had bitten into something that absorbed. But it wasn't enough. The block was only halfway in. The jaws were chewing on it, trying to spit it out. "Hit it again!" Elias yelled, looking up at Marcus. The young engineer was staggering. The recoil of the first strike had nearly thrown him off his feet. His suit jacket was torn at the shoulder, his expensive tie flapping wildly in the wind like a distress signal. He looked at the hammer in his hands, then at Elias. He saw the old man's face, etched with grime and rain, eyes burning with a ferocious, ancient intensity. Marcus didn't think about the physics. He didn't think about the damping coefficient or the Young's modulus of the timber. He just saw the gap. He hefted the hammer, his muscles burning with lactic acid, and swung again. Thud! The wood groaned. It was a deep, splintering sound. The block was driven 2 inches deeper into the throat of the joint. The reaction was immediate. The bridge, which had been heaving with the predictability of a pendulum, suddenly jerked. The smooth, deadly oscillation was interrupted by a violent spasm. Felt like a car hitting a pothole at high speed. The deck dropped, then caught itself, then shuddered sideways. Underneath them, the sound changed. The high-pitched, harmonic screech of the steel, the singing that had terrified the town, dropped an octave. It became a guttural grinding. The pure note of the resonance was being muddied. The bridge was confused. "It's working," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking. "The hysteresis. It's dissipating the energy." "Shut up and hit it," Elias barked, adjusting his grip on the wood. His hands were slippery with rain and something stickier, sap. The intense pressure was literally wringing the lifeblood out of the oak. It was bleeding amber resin onto the cold steel. The bridge tried to heave up again, to restart its dance of death. The wind caught the airfoil of the deck, trying to lift it, but the joint was jammed. The monolithic spine, which Marcus had designed to be one continuous, rigid line, was now broken by a foreign object. The wave of energy traveling down the bridge hit the wood and scattered. The structure bucked wildly. This was the most dangerous moment. The transition from organized chaos to disorganized chaos. Elias felt the block shift. "It's spitting it out," he warned. The steel jaws were opening slightly as the bridge twisted, and the pressure on the wood released. The block, compressed like a spring, threatened to pop loose. If it flew out now, the next impact would shatter the bridge's spine. Elias did the only thing he could do. He threw his body weight onto the wood. He leaned over the gap, his chest pressing down on the protruding end of the oak block, using his own mass to keep it seated until the jaws clamped down again. "No, Elias!" Marcus lunged forward, dropping the hammer to grab the old man's belt. "Don't let me fall," Elias gritted out. "Just drive it home." Marcus scrambled for the hammer. He was sobbing now, tears mixing with the rain on his face. He was terrified, not just for his life, but for the soul of the man beneath him. He grabbed the handle. He stood up, straddling the gap, his legs shaking on the heaving deck. He looked down at the wood. It was mangled, crushed, oozing sap, but it was holding. He raised the hammer over his head. He channeled every ounce of frustration, every late night of study, every moment of arrogance, and every second of humility into the swing. Crack. The blow was true. It struck the center of the block with the force of a pile driver. The wood vanished into the gap. It was driven flush with the deck surface. The bridge slammed down on it. This time, there was no bounce. There was no vibration. There was a sound like a heavy door closing in a tomb. Thump. The energy died. It was instant. The kinetic force, having nowhere to go, was swallowed by the crushed fibers of the white oak. The heat generated by the friction was immense. Steam hissed up from the joint, smelling of burnt sugar and campfires. The bridge shuddered once, a long, exhausted exhale, and then settled. The wind continued to howl. The gale was still blowing at 40 miles per hour, ripping through the cables and tearing at the clothes of the two men. But the bridge didn't move. It stood firm. The aerodynamic instability was gone because the structural rhythm had been broken. The perfect loop of energy had been severed by a piece of imperfection. Elias slumped forward, his forehead resting on the cold, wet steel of the expansion joint. He was gasping for air, his lungs burning as if he had swallowed fire. His arms hung uselessly at his sides, the nerves firing randomly, making his fingers twitch. Marcus dropped the hammer. It clattered on the asphalt, a tinny, insignificant sound compared to the thunder that had preceded it. He fell to his knees beside Elias. "Elias? Elias!" The old man didn't move for a moment. Then, slowly, painfully, he rolled onto his side. His face was pale. His lips blue from the cold and the exertion, but his eyes were open. He looked at the gap in the bridge. The wood was invisible now, buried deep inside the steel throat of the machine. But they could smell it. The scent of hot, wet oak was overpowering, cutting through the smell of ozone and fear. "Is it?" Elias wheezed, his voice a dry rattle. "Is it level?" Marcus blinked, wiping the rain from his eyes. He looked at the deck. The misalignment was gone. The two sections of the bridge were perfectly flush. The chaotic twisting had stopped completely. The bridge was just a bridge again. Static. Boring. Safe. Yes? Marcus whispered, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in his chest. Yes, it's level. Elias closed his eyes and let out a long, trembling breath. Good. That's good. For a long time, neither of them moved. They lay there in the middle of the empty, rain-swept highway, huddled against the Jersey barrier like shipwreck survivors on a life raft. The storm raged around them, but the terror had drained out of the world. Far away, at the ends of the bridge, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles pulsed in the gloom, red and blue strobes painting the wet asphalt. But no one came out to them yet. The fear was still too fresh. The bridge was still seen as a monster by those watching from the shore. Marcus looked at his hands. They were blistered and raw. He had never done a day of manual labor in his life, and now his palms were shredded. He looked at Elias's hands, lying still on the wet road. They were scarred, gnarled, fingers crooked from decades of holding tools, nails thick and yellowed. He reached out and touched the old man's shoulder. "You saved us," Marcus said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "The calculations. I didn't see it. I didn't see the dampening." Elias opened one eye. It was bloodshot. "You built a good boat, son," he murmured. "You just forgot to give it an anchor." Marcus shook his head, looking at the spot where the wood was buried. "It's not an anchor. It's a sacrifice. The wood is taking the load. It's being crushed to keep the steel apart." "That's what wood does," Elias said, wincing as he tried to sit up. "It carries the weight. It lived 100 years in the forest fighting gravity. It knows how to hold on." Elias groaned as he shifted his weight. "Help me up. If I stay down here any longer, I'll rust." Marcus scrambled to his feet and offered his hand. This time he didn't pull gingerly. He gripped Elias's forearm with both hands and hauled him up, taking the old man's weight against his own. They stood there, swaying slightly in the wind. The bridge under their feet was solid rock. It didn't tremble. It didn't sing. It was dead silent, save for the wind whistling through the cables. Elias reached into his pocket, his trembling fingers searching for his pack of cigarettes. He pulled it out, but it was soaked through, a soggy mess of paper and tobacco. He stared at it for a moment, then chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. He tossed the pack over the railing. They watched it fall, a tiny speck disappearing into the gray abyss of the gorge. "You know," Elias said, leaning heavily on the railing and looking out at the storm, "my grandfather used to say that a bridge isn't finished until the weather has had its say." Marcus looked at the steel cables, now hanging motionless in the gale. He touched the cold metal of the railing. Felt different now. Less like a mathematical abstraction, more like something forged. "I think the weather is done talking," Marcus said. "For today," Elias corrected him. "Only for today." They turned to look toward the end of the bridge. People were starting to emerge from the safety of the land. First the sheriff, then a few paramedics moving cautiously, testing the ground with every step. They looked like ants returning to a disturbed hill. "They're going to ask what happened," Marcus said, a sudden wave of anxiety washing over him. "The press, the mayor, they're going to want the technical explanation. They're going to want to know how I fixed it." Elias adjusted his wet hat, pulling the brim down low over his eyes. He looked at the young engineer, and for the first time, there was no pity in his gaze, only a quiet sort of respect. "You didn't fix it, Marcus," Elias said softly. "We fixed it, and you don't need to give them a lecture on fluid dynamics." "What do I tell them?" Elias patted the pocket of his overalls, finding a stray wood shaving that had survived the rain. He twirled it between his fingers. "Tell them the truth," Elias said. "Tell them the steel was lonely." The old carpenter pushed himself off the railing and began the long, limping walk back toward his truck. He didn't wait for the accolades. He didn't wait for the medics. He just wanted to go home, dry off, and maybe finish planing that pew for the church. Marcus watched him go. He stood alone in the center of his $5 million creation, the rain running down his face, realizing that the most important structural component of the entire bridge was a $5 block of oak that would never be seen again. He looked down at the smooth steel plate hiding the gap. He placed his hand on it. It was warm. The walk back to the shore felt longer than the construction of the bridge itself. The storm, having vented its fury upon the steel and the stone, was beginning to retreat into a sullen drizzle, leaving behind an atmosphere that was cold, wet, and heavy with the smell of ozone. Elias Thorne and Marcus Vance walked side by side, a strange and silent procession of two emerging from the mist. They moved slowly. Elias walked with a pronounced limp, his right hip grinding with every step, the adrenaline that had served as his temporary anesthetic now draining away into the asphalt. Marcus walked like a man waking from a coma, his steps uncertain, his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the sea of flashing red and blue lights that awaited them at the bridge's entrance. The silence that greeted them was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath. Hundreds of people, townsfolk, council members, reporters, and caterers, stood frozen behind the police tape that Sheriff Miller had hastily strung up. 10 minutes ago, this crowd had been a screaming, stampeding mob. Now they were a tableau of shock. They were soaked to the bone, their expensive dedication day clothes clinging to their bodies, their hair plastered to their skulls. But no one was leaving. They were paralyzed by the cognitive dissonance of what they had just witnessed. They had seen the future buckle, and they had seen the past step in to save it. As the two men crossed the final expansion joint and stepped onto solid ground, the spell broke. "They're alive!" someone shouted. A shrill, hysterical cry that cracked the air. A ripple went through the crowd, a collective exhale that sounded like a gust of wind. But it didn't erupt into cheers. It was too complex for that. There was shame in the air, a palpable embarrassment that hung over the citizens of Oakhaven. They looked at Elias, the man they had snickered at during the town hall meetings, the man they called a relic, a nuisance, and they couldn't meet his eyes. They saw the mud caked on his knees. They saw the blood on his knuckles. They saw the sledgehammer he had left on the bridge, a ghost tool in their minds. Mayor Sterling was the first to move. He broke through the police line, his face a mask of panic that he was desperately trying to reshape into concern. He was flanked by his press secretary and two state troopers, moving with the frantic energy of a man watching his political career circling the drain. "Marcus, Mr. Vance," Sterling called out, his voice shrill. He ignored Elias completely, his eyes locking onto the young engineer as if Marcus were a life raft. "Thank God. The sensors. We saw the telemetry go dark. What happened? Was it a sensor malfunction? Tell me it was a sensor malfunction." Marcus stopped. He looked at the mayor. He looked at the news crews who were now surging forward, their cameras shouldered like rocket launchers, blinding LED lights cutting through the gloom. Microphones on boom poles dipped over the police tape, hungry for a soundbite, for an explanation, for anything that could make sense of the terror. "It wasn't a malfunction," Marcus said. His voice was raspy, stripped of its usual smooth confidence. He sounded like he had been screaming for hours. "But the stabilization," Sterling hissed, leaning in close, his breath smelling of stale champagne and fear. "The dampeners. We need a statement, Marcus. The state governor is on the phone. We need to tell them this was a calibration anomaly, a one-in-a-million weather event. We can spin this. We just need the technical language." The cameras were rolling. The red tally lights blinked like predatory eyes. A reporter from Channel 5 thrust a microphone toward Marcus's face. "Mr. Vance, is the bridge safe? Did the structural integrity fail? What did you do out there?" Marcus looked down at his hands. They were trembling. The blisters on his palms had burst, raw red flesh exposed to the cold air. He looked at his suit, ruined and stained with grease and oak sap. Then he looked at Elias. The old carpenter was already trying to drift away. Elias had his head down, the brim of his hat pulled low, trying to make himself small, to slip into the shadows of the parking lot and disappear. He wanted no part of this circus. He looked exhausted, a grayness to his skin that frightened Marcus. "It wasn't a calibration," Marcus said, his voice gaining a sudden, hard edge. The mayor froze. "Marcus, be careful." Marcus turned to the cameras. He looked directly into the lens, seeing his own reflection in the glass. He thought about the numbers. He thought about the pride he had felt standing on that podium. And then he thought about the sound of the sledgehammer hitting the wood, that dull, ugly, beautiful thud that had stopped the world from ending. "The design was flawed," Marcus said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The mayor gasped. The reporters scrambled, sensing blood. "Flawed?" the reporter pressed. "You mean the engineering was wrong?" "I mean I was wrong," Marcus continued, and for the first time in his life, the admission didn't hurt, felt like setting down a heavy pack. "I built a structure that was too proud to bend. I tried to conquer the wind with rigidity, and today that arrogance almost killed everyone on this bridge." He pointed a shaking finger, not at the bridge, but at the retreating back of the old man in the dirty overalls. "That man," Marcus said, his voice rising over the murmurs of the crowd. "Elias Thorne. He told me. He told the council. He told all of us months ago. We didn't listen because he didn't use the right software. We didn't listen because he smelled like sawdust instead of cologne." Elias stopped walking. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders stiffened. "Mr. Thorne didn't use a computer," Marcus said, tears welling up in his eyes again, unbidden. "He used a block of white oak and a hammer. He climbed into the expansion joint while the bridge was trying to tear itself apart. He risked his life to put a soul back into the steel." Marcus turned back to the mayor, whose face had gone the color of old ash. "You want a statement, Mr. Mayor? Here it is. The Silver Creek span is standing right now not because of my engineering, but because a carpenter knew that sometimes you have to bleed to keep things together." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of shock anymore. It was the silence of reverence. The crowd turned as one to look at Elias. The old man stood there, trapped by the attention he so desperately wanted to avoid. He slowly turned his head, his profile illuminated by the harsh glare of the TV lights. He looked tired. He looked old. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man who had just finished a very long, very hard shift. "Elias!" someone shouted from the back. It was Mrs. Gable. "Thank you, Elias. Thank you." Another voice joined in. It started a cascade. A clapping began, sporadic at first, then swelling. It wasn't the polite, rhythmic applause of the ribbon-cutting ceremony. This was messy, emotional applause. People were crying. They were clapping with a frantic intensity, trying to wash away their guilt with noise. Elias winced. He hated it. He hated the noise. He hated the eyes. He raised a hand, not in a wave, but in a gesture of dismissal, a stop-it motion. He caught Marcus's eye across the gap of the police tape. Marcus nodded, a small, sad smile on his face. "I had to tell them," the look said. "I couldn't let them steal this from you." Elias grunted, shook his head, and turned his back on the applause. He began to walk again, the crowd parting for him without being asked. The sheriff, who had been about to intercept him to ask for a statement, stepped back, tipping his hat. The deputies lowered the police tape to let him pass. He walked through the gauntlet of his neighbors. He saw the baker who had overcharged him for a loaf of bread last week. He saw the banker who had denied his loan application for a new roof. They all looked at the ground as he passed. He didn't care about their shame. He just wanted to sit down. His hip was screaming now, a hot wire of pain running from his pelvis to his knee. His chest felt tight. He reached the edge of the parking lot, where the darkness finally offered some cover. The noise of the crowd faded slightly, replaced by the rhythmic thrum-thrum of the diesel generators powering the lights. He made it to his truck. The old Ford F-150 sat there like a loyal dog, covered in mud, the driver's side door slightly ajar from when he had bailed out. Elias leaned against the fender, his legs finally giving out. He slid down until he was sitting on the running board, his head resting against the cool metal of the door. He closed his eyes. His hands were shaking so bad he couldn't unclench them from the ghost grip of the hammer. "Grandpa?" The voice was small, terrified, and familiar. Elias opened his eyes. Standing a few feet away, clutching a rain-soaked cardigan around her shoulders, was Sarah, his granddaughter. She was 22, a waitress at the local diner, with eyes that usually sparkled with mischief but were now wide with terror. She had been in the crowd. She had seen him go over the rail. "Hi, sweetie," Elias whispered. He tried to smile, but his face muscles twitched uncontrollably. Sarah didn't say anything. She rushed forward and fell to her knees in the mud, wrapping her arms around his neck. She buried her face in his wet, sawdust-smelling shoulder and sobbed. It was a guttural, releasing cry, the sound of a child who thought they had become an orphan. "I thought," she choked out. "I saw you, over the edge. I thought you were gone." Elias raised a trembling hand and patted her hair. Felt clumsy. He couldn't feel his fingertips. "Not yet, Sarah. Not yet. Wood's too green to burn." She pulled back, gripping his face in her hands. She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the burst capillaries in his eyes. She saw the gray pallor of his skin. She saw the way his left arm was hanging limp, the shoulder likely bruised deep to the bone from the recoil of the bridge. "You're hurt," she said, her voice trembling.
"Just old, Elias Leet.
Just tired." He tried to reach into his pocket for his keys, but his hand wouldn't obey. His fingers were locked in a claw, spasming. He looked at his hand with a detached curiosity, as if it belonged to someone else. "I can't seem to," he stammered, frustration leaking into his voice. Sarah saw it. She saw the frailty that he had hidden under layers of flannel and stubbornness for years. She realized, with a pang of heartache, that the man who had just saved the town was not invincible. He was breakable, and he had almost broken himself for people who didn't care about him. "It's okay," she whispered, taking his hand in hers. Her hands were warm and soft against his cold, rough skin. She gently massaged his fingers, trying to coax the cramps away. "I've got you, Grandpa. I'm driving." She fished the keys out of his pocket. She helped him stand. It was a struggle. He was a big man, dead weight now that the adrenaline was gone. She grunted with effort, maneuvering him into the passenger seat. "My tools," Elias mumbled, looking back toward the bridge. "Left my hammer." "We'll get it later," Sarah said, bucking his seatbelt. "We'll get a new one, a better one." "Ain't no better one," Elias muttered, his head lolling back against the headrest. "That handle. Took 30 years to get the grip right." Sarah closed the door. The sound was solid, safe. She walked around to the driver's side, wiping her eyes. She looked back at the bridge one last time. The scene was still chaotic. The lights were still flashing. Marcus Vance was still surrounded by reporters, gesturing wildly, pointing at the gap in the steel. But the bridge itself was silent. It loomed against the night sky, a dark silhouette, and somewhere in its belly, Sarah knew, was a piece of her grandfather's workshop. She climbed in and started the truck. The engine roared to life, a rough, throaty idle that sounded like home. "Take me the back way," Elias whispered, his eyes closed. "Don't want to drive past them. Don't want them waving at me." "I know," Sarah said softly. She put the truck in gear. "We'll go by the river road." As they drove away, leaving the lights and the noise behind, Elias let out a long breath. The truck bounced over the potholes, the suspension squeaking. "Sarah?" "Yeah, Grandpa. That boy, the engineer. Marcus." "Yeah. He hits good," Elias murmured, his voice drifting into sleep. "For a man in a suit, he hits good." Sarah smiled through her tears. She reached over and rested her hand on his forearm as the darkness of the old river road swallowed them up, carrying the hero of Oakhaven back to the quiet obscurity he loved, while the storm finally, mercifully, broke apart overhead, revealing a single steady star. 3 days after the storm, the silence in Oakhaven was louder than the gale had ever been. It was a silence made of held breaths and nervous glances, of a town waiting for permission to exhale. The sun had returned, casting a blinding, cheerful glare over the puddles that still pockmarked the streets, but the atmosphere remained thick with the hangover of near disaster. In the small, cedar-shingled house at the end of River Road, Elias Thorne lay in a bed that felt too soft, in a room that felt too small. His body, which had served him with the reliable, quiet strength of an old truck for 7 decades, had finally staged a mutiny. The bruises had blossomed across his torso like dark nebulas, purple and black galaxies swirling under his pale skin where the railing had dug in and where the recoil of the impact had shuddered through his skeleton. His right shoulder was locked in a spasm so tight it felt like someone had driven a nail through the rotator cuff. But the pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the smell. It was the smell of tuna casserole, and lasagna, and pot roast. The scent drifted under his bedroom door, a cloying, suffocating fog of well-meaning charity. "Sarah," Elias croaked. His voice sounded like sandpaper being dragged across concrete. The door creaked open. Sarah appeared, balancing a tray with a glass of water and a bottle of painkillers. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. But she was smiling, that patient, patronizing smile people give to invalids and children. "You're awake," she said softly. Mrs. Higgins brought over her peach cobbler, and the Rotary Club sent a fruit basket the size of a tractor tire. Elias groaned, trying to shift his weight and regretting it immediately as a bolt of lightning shot down his hip. "If I eat one more bite of charity, I'm going to die. Tell them to go away. Tell them I have leprosy. Tell them I'm contagious." "I can't tell them that, Grandpa," Sarah said, setting the tray on the nightstand and sitting on the edge of the bed. "They just want to say thank you. You're the hero of Oakhaven now." The local paper ran a headline, "The Carpenter's Miracle." Elias squeezed his eyes shut. "Miracle," he spat. "It was physics. It was wood and sweat. Don't let them turn it into magic, Sarah. Once they make it magic, they stop trying to understand it." He turned his head to look out the window. His workshop was visible in the backyard, silent and dark. He could see the pile of flowers growing by the front gate. Bouquets of cheap carnations, handwritten cards in plastic sleeves, even a few wooden crosses. It made his skin crawl. They were treating his home like a shrine and him like a saint, when all he had done was fix a bad joint. Felt fraudulent. He hadn't done it for them. He had done it because he couldn't stand to hear the wood screaming. "I need to get up," Elias muttered, gripping the sheets. "You need to stay right there," Sarah said firmly, pushing him back down with a gentle hand on his chest. "Dr. Evans said your blood pressure was through the roof. You tore a ligament in your shoulder, and your hip is inflamed. You're staying in bed until the swelling goes down." "My tools," Elias grumbled, staring at the ceiling. "I left my hammer on the bridge. It's going to rust. Steel doesn't like the rain, Sarah. It gets pitted." "Marcus said he'd bring it back," Sarah soothed him. "Marcus," Elias repeated the name. He thought of the young man in the ruined suit, swinging the hammer with eyes full of terror and determination. "How is the boy? Have they crucified him yet?" 5 miles away, in the air-conditioned sterility of the State Infrastructure Committee's temporary inquiry room, Marcus Vance was indeed being crucified. But they weren't using nails, they were using regulations. The room was located in the basement of the county courthouse, a windowless box with fluorescent lights that hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. Marcus sat at a solitary metal table, facing a panel of 5 men and women. They were clean, dry, and terrifyingly bureaucratic. In the center of the panel sat Leonard Graves, the senior state inspector. Graves was a man who looked like he had been manufactured, not born. His suit was gray, his hair was gray, and his eyes were the flat, non-reflective color of slate. He didn't blink often. He tapped a manicured finger on a thick stack of reports, the preliminary assessment of the Silver Creek incident. "Mr. Vance," Graves said, his voice dry and devoid of inflection, "let us review the timeline. At 1400 hours, aerodynamic instability was detected. At 1415, The amplitude of the vertical oscillation exceeded 3 feet. At 1420, you authorized and personally participated in the insertion of a foreign biological object into the primary expansion joint of a Class A suspension bridge. It wasn't a foreign object, Marcus said. He was sitting up straight, his hands clasped tight to stop them from shaking. He was wearing a new suit, but he felt like he was still wearing the mud-stained rags of Saturday. It was a friction damper, a viscoelastic element. Graves peered over his spectacles. It was a log, Mr. Vance. A piece of Quercus alba, white oak, untreated, uncertified, non-compliant with ASTM standards for bridge construction materials. It stopped the resonance, Marcus argued, his voice rising slightly. The bridge was entering a divergent flutter state. The locked node design failed to dissipate the energy. The wood provided the necessary hysteresis. It absorbed the kinetic load through cellular compression. If we hadn't placed it, the main girders would have sheared within minutes. Graves didn't look impressed. He flipped a page in the file. We are not disputing that the bridge is currently standing. We are disputing the methodology and the current status. He looked up, his gray eyes locking onto Marcus. My team inspected the site this morning. The object is still lodged in the expansion joint. It is compressed flush with the deck. It is currently bearing approximately 15% of the longitudinal thermal load. It's holding the tension, Marcus nodded. It's stable. It is organic matter, Graves said, enunciating each syllable as if he were talking to a slow child. Organic matter rots, Mr. Vance. It absorbs moisture. It attracts insects. It changes density with temperature. It is unpredictable. The code section 404, paragraph B, clearly states that all load-bearing components must be steel, concrete, or approved composite. Graves leaned forward. I am issuing a mandatory rectification order. The debris must be removed immediately. The joint must be cleared and restored to the original design specifications by 0800 hours tomorrow morning. Marcus felt a cold stone drop in his stomach. You can't do that. I can and I have, Graves said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. It was a formal order, stamped with the red seal of the state. You will extract the wood. You will inspect the steel for damage. And you will install hydraulic dampers, approved hydraulic dampers, within the week. Until then, the bridge remains closed. You don't understand. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. The steel is traumatized. The molecular lattice has been subjected to extreme stress cycles. It's currently settled into a new equilibrium because of the wood. If you rip that block out now, suddenly the shock, the residual stress could cause a snapback effect. The girders could warp. You need to let it settle. You need to let the stress bleed off slowly. Graves cleaned his glasses with a microfiber cloth, unbothered. Steel does not have feelings, Mr. Vance. It does not get traumatized. It has a yield strength and a tensile limit. If the numbers say it holds, it holds. Remove the debris, or I will have your license revoked for gross negligence. Marcus stared at the man. He wanted to scream. He wanted to throw the table. He was looking at the same arrogance he had possessed just 3 days ago. He saw his own reflection in Graves, the blind faith in the book, the refusal to look at the reality of the chaos. It's not debris, Marcus whispered. It's the only thing keeping that bridge honest. 0800 hours, Graves repeated. Dismissed. Marcus walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. He felt dizzy. He loosened his tie, gasping for air. The town square was bustling with news vans. He pulled his sunglasses out and shoved them onto his face, ducking his head to avoid the reporters. He got into his car, a sleek German sedan that felt too sterile now. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. He had to remove it. He had to go back to the bridge, take a crowbar or a drill, and dig out the piece of wood that Elias had almost died to place. He had to desecrate the fix. Steel doesn't have feelings. That's what Graves had said. Marcus started the car. He didn't drive toward the bridge. He turned left, toward River Road. He needed to talk to the one person who knew that Graves was wrong. The drive to Elias's house was a journey through a town transformed. The handwritten signs on the telephone poles flashed by. Thank you, Elias. God bless the builder. True grit. Marcus felt a pang of guilt. He was the villain in this story. The arrogant city boy who broke the bridge. Elias was the folk hero. And now, Marcus was coming to ask the hero for one last favor. He was coming to tell him that the state was going to erase his work. He pulled into the dirt driveway. The old Ford truck was parked there, still caked in mud. The front porch was overflowing with casseroles and flower baskets. Marcus stepped over a particularly large arrangement of lilies and knocked on the door. Sarah answered. She looked surprised to see him, then wary. She blocked the doorway slightly, a protective instinct kicking in. He's resting, Marcus. He's really banged up. I know, Sarah. I'm sorry, Marcus said, and he meant it. He looked humbled, his shoulders slumped. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't an emergency. A real one. Sarah studied his face. She saw the desperation there. She sighed and stepped back. 5 minutes. If you get him worked up, I'm throwing you out. She led him down the hallway. The house smelled of old wood, lemon polish, and the faint, medicinal scent of menthol rub. Marcus entered the bedroom. Elias was propped up on 3 pillows, staring at a wall where a crucifix hung next to an old, black and white photo of a framing crew from the 1950s. The old man turned his head. His face was gray, unshaven, the stubble white as snow. He looked frail in the afternoon light, stripped of his heavy work clothes, but his eyes were still sharp. You look like you just swallowed a bag of nails, son, Elias rasped. Marcus stood at the foot of the bed. He didn't know how to start. They want to take it out, Elias. Elias didn't blink. He reached for a glass of water, his hand shaking slightly, and took a sip. The state? The senior inspector, Leonard Graves. He calls it foreign debris. He says it violates Code Section 404. He ordered me to remove it by tomorrow morning. Elias set the glass down. He let out a long, low chuckle that turned into a cough. He winced, clutching his ribs. Of course he did. Elias wheezed. He's reading the book. The book says bridges are made of metal. The book doesn't know about the gap. I tried to explain, Marcus said, pacing the small room. I told him about the hysteresis. I told him the steel needs to settle. But he won't listen. He says steel doesn't have memory. He's a fool, Elias said softly. Everything has memory. You bend a paperclip back and forth, it gets hot. That's memory. That's pain. I have to take it out, Elias. Marcus stopped pacing. He looked at the old man, his eyes pleading. If I don't, they'll revoke my license. They'll shut down the project. But I'm terrified. I'm scared that if I pull that wood out, the internal tension is going to snap. The girders, they're twisted. The wood is holding the twist. If I release it suddenly, it'll spring back. Elias finished the sentence. Like a rubber band, and it might crack the welds. Exactly. So how do I explain that to a man who only speaks in code violations? I don't have the words, Elias. I have the math, but the math isn't working. Elias closed his eyes. He lay there for a long moment, breathing shallowly. The clock on the wall ticked, a rhythmic, wooden sound. Hand me that cane, Elias said, pointing to a hickory walking stick leaning against the dresser. Marcus handed it to him. Elias gripped the stick. You know why hickory makes a good handle? He asked. Marcus shook his head. Because it stings, Elias said. If you hit a baseball with an ash bat, it cracks. If you hit it with hickory, it vibrates, tells your hands what you did wrong, talks back. Elias looked at Marcus. You're trying to explain the wood to him using engineering words. You're talking about, what did you call it? Hysteresis? Yes, energy dissipation. Don't tell him that, Elias said. Tell him about the creep. Creep? It's a carpenter's term. Elias shifted, grimacing. When you put a heavy beam in a house, it sags. Just a little. Over the first year, it sags maybe half an inch. Then it stops. It finds its set. The wood fibers compress, they rearrange themselves to carry the load. They get comfortable. If you jack that beam up after a year, try to make it straight again. The house cracks. The plaster tears. Because the house got used to the sag. It accepted the burden. Elias pointed the cane at Marcus. That bridge of yours. It was fighting the wind. It was angry. We gave it a piece of wood to bite on like a soldier biting a bullet during surgery. Now the steel is biting into that oak. It's compressing. It's finding a new shape. It's finding its set. Marcus's eyes widened. Stress relaxation. In metallurgy, we call it stress relaxation. The internal lattice rearranges to relieve the strain. Call it whatever fancy name you want, Elias said. But the bridge is healing. It's forming a callus around that wood. If you rip the scab off now, it's going to bleed. You tell your Mr. Graves that. Tell him the bridge is an invalid. It's in recovery. You don't pull the stitches out the day after the surgery. Marcus felt a sudden clarity. The metaphor was perfect. It wasn't about debris. It was about the healing process of the material. The wood is a splint, Marcus whispered. It's a splint, Elias agreed. And you tell him that wood is losing moisture. It's shrinking, very slowly. As it shrinks, it's going to gently let the steel come back together. It's letting the bridge down easy. If he digs it out with a crowbar, he's dropping the patient on the floor. Marcus stared at the old man. Elias Thorne, with his 8th grade education and his bruised body, understood the dynamic properties of the structure better than the simulation software. He understood time. He understood that materials existed in a relationship with time. I can use that, Marcus said, his mind racing. I can calculate the shrinkage rate of the oak. I can model the gradual stress release. I can show him that the wood is the removal process. It removes itself atom by atom as it dries. Elias chuckled. There you go. Now you're thinking like a craftsman. You're working with the grain. Marcus reached out and took Elias's hand. The old man's skin was dry and papery, but the grip was still there. Thank you, Elias. Again. Get out of here, Elias grunted, pulling his hand back. And take one of those casseroles with you. I swear, if I smell tuna one more time, I'm gonna set the house on fire. Marcus smiled, a genuine, tired smile. I'll handle Graves. And Elias, when you're better, I have a design for a roof I'm working on. I could use a second pair of eyes. Elias lay back against the pillows, closing his eyes. A faint smile touched his lips. We'll see. If it's another one of those flat, modernist roofs that leak when it drizzles, don't bother. It's a gable, Marcus promised. Steep pitch. Good. Elias whispered. Water needs to run. Marcus left the room, feeling lighter than he had in days. He walked past Sarah in the hallway. Well? She asked, arms crossed. He's good, Marcus said. He's incredible. I know, Sarah said softly. You just realized? Yeah, Marcus admitted. I think I just did. He walked out to his car. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the yard full of flowers. He looked at the sign stapled to the telephone pole. The Carpenter's Miracle. He got in the car and placed his phone on the dashboard. He dialed Graves' number. Graves. The voice answered, sharp and impatient. Mr. Graves, this is Marcus Vance. I'm not removing the wood. Excuse me? I hope you have a lawyer, Mr. Vance. I don't need a lawyer. I need to explain the concept of stress relaxation via organic volumetric shrinkage. I'm sending you a new model. The wood acts as a sacrificial splint. It shrinks at a rate of 0.4% per week. It allows the steel to return to zero stress equilibrium gradually. If we remove it manually, we induce a shock load of 400 kips instantaneously. It will shear the flange welds. There was a silence on the other end of the line. A long silence. Marcus could hear the gears turning in the bureaucrat's mind. He was speaking the language of risk management now. He wasn't talking about soul. He was talking about liability. If we pull it, Marcus pressed, channeling Elias's gravelly conviction. We break the bridge. It's a surgical site. Leonard, you don't rip out the stitches. Finally, Graves spoke. Submit the shrinkage data and a monitoring schedule. If the oscillation returns, even by a millimeter. It won't, Marcus said. It's setting. You have 1 week, Vance. Then we reevaluate. Graves out. The line went dead. Marcus let out a breath that fogged up the windshield. He slumped back in the seat, watching the fireflies beginning to blink in the tall grass around Elias's workshop. He had bought time, not with steel but with a story about a splint. Back inside the house, Elias listened to the sound of the car driving away. He reached for his cane, hooking the handle of the bedside drawer. He pulled it open. Inside, nestled among his socks, was a small, polished block of white oak, a cut-off from the same beam he had used on the bridge. He picked it up, rubbing his thumb over the grain. It was cool and smooth. "Stubborn old thing," he whispered to the wood. "Just like me." He placed it on his chest, folded his hands over it, and for the first time since the bridge screamed, he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. 1 year later, autumn had come to the Silver Creek Canyon, painting the jagged slopes in a riot of burning rust, deep gold, and bruised violet. The air was crisp, carrying that specific, melancholic scent of dry leaves and wood smoke that signals the earth is preparing for sleep. Below, the river, which had raged so violently the previous summer, was now a placid ribbon of turquoise, winding its way through the rocks with a lazy serpentine grace. And spanning the void, cutting a clean, white line against the chaotic tapestry of the foliage, stood the bridge. It didn't look different to the casual eye. It was still a marvel of modern engineering, a cable-stayed giant that seemed to float on strings of light. But to the people of Oakhaven, the structure had changed. It was no longer the alien intruder that had screamed in the wind. It had settled into the landscape. The concrete abutments were weathering, streaked with the subtle patina of rain and mineral dust, making them look less like factory-made monoliths and more like extensions of the cliffs themselves. The bridge had stopped fighting the canyon. It had accepted its place within it. On this particular Saturday afternoon, the traffic had been stopped. A small crowd had gathered at the midpoint of the span, clustered around a draped object near the southern railing. It was a quieter gathering than the one that had taken place a year ago. There were no marching bands, no frantic news crews with blinding lights, and no desperate screaming. The mood was reverent, almost church-like, disturbed only by the gentle flapping of coat tails in the breeze. Elias Thorne stood near the edge of the group. He looked older. The year had carved the lines of his face deeper, eroding the soft tissue to reveal the hard, stubborn bone beneath. He stood with his weight leaning heavily on a cane, a beautiful hand-carved piece of hickory that had been polished to a glass-like shine. His right hip, the one that had taken the brunt of the railing impact, never quite stopped aching when the barometric pressure dropped. A constant, dull reminder of the day gravity had tried to claim him. Sarah stood beside him, her arm linked through his elbow. She wasn't holding him up anymore. She was standing with him. She wore a wool coat and a proud, fierce expression, scanning the crowd as if daring anyone to disrespect the old man. "You okay, Grandpa?" she whispered, leaning in close. "I'm fine," Elias grunted, though he shifted his weight to ease the throb in his leg. "Just wish they'd get on with it. The wind's picking up. I can feel it in my knee." "It's a nice breeze," Sarah smiled. "It's not angry." Elias looked up at the cables. She was right. The wind was blowing, a steady 15 miles per hour from the north, but the cables weren't vibrating with that terrifying, high-frequency hum anymore. They were singing a low, steady note, a cello's deep thrum that felt more like a purr than a scream. At the center of the gathering, Mayor Sterling cleared his throat. He looked older too, perhaps humbled by the near disaster that had almost ended his career. He stood before a microphone stand that didn't squeal this time. "Citizens of Oakhaven," the mayor began, his voice lacking the bombastic projection of the previous year, replaced by a more measured, thoughtful tone. "We are here today not to cut a ribbon, but to close a wound. A year ago, we learned a difficult lesson. We learned that progress cannot simply bulldoze over nature. We learned that the newest way is not always the only way. He gestured to the man standing next to him, Marcus Vance. The change in the young engineer was perhaps the most striking of all. The Marcus of a year ago, the man in the impeccable Italian suit who spoke in rapid-fire jargon, was gone. In his place stood a man who looked like he had been weathered. He wore a heavy canvas field jacket, jeans, and work boots that were scuffed at the toes. His hair was a little longer, wind-blown and unstyled. He held a notebook in his hand, a tattered moleskin with a pencil tucked into the spine. He didn't look like a man who commanded the bridge. He looked like a man who maintained it. "I'm not much for speeches," Marcus said as he stepped to the mic. The crowd laughed softly, a warm, forgiving sound. I used to think I could explain the world with an equation. I thought that if the math worked, the reality had to follow." Marcus looked out at the crowd, his eyes finding Elias. He held the old man's gaze for a long moment, a silent communication passing between them that was louder than the PA system. "We call this the Silver Creek span," Marcus continued. "But in the engineering journals, in the case studies that are now taught in universities across the country, it is known as the Oakhaven anomaly. They study it because it defies the standard model. They study it because for 3 critical weeks, while we manufactured the permanent hydraulic dampers, the safety of this entire structure relied on a block of white oak." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a jagged, compressed splinter of wood, dark with age and pressure. "This is all that's left of it," Marcus said, holding it up. "When we finally removed the block to install the permanent system, it had been compressed to 60% of its original volume. It was hard as stone. It had literally become part of the bridge. It sacrificed its own structure to save the steel." He placed the splinter back in his pocket, close to his heart. "We are dedicating this plaque today," Marcus said, motioning to the draped object. "Not to the bridge, but to the philosophy that saved it. To the idea that rigidity is not strength. That the ability to yield, to absorb, to bend without breaking. That is the only true durability." Marcus stepped back and nodded to the mayor. Together, they pulled the velvet cloth away. Revealed underneath was not a standard bronze casting. It was a slab of polished granite, inset into the railing at the exact spot where the expansion joint lay. But in the center of the granite, preserved behind a thick pane of tempered glass, was a cross-section of the original white oak block. You could see the crushed grain, the warped rings, the violence of the pressure it had endured. Below it, engraved in the stone, were simple words. "In honor of the grain here on July 4th, the past held up the future. Dedicated to Elias Thorne, Master Carpenter. When the wind blows, the wise tree bows." The crowd applauded. It was a soft, rolling sound, like rain on a tin roof. Elias felt his face grow hot. He hated the attention, yet, looking at that piece of mangled wood immortalized in stone, he felt a lump form in his throat that had nothing to do with the cold air. "Go on," Sarah nudged him. "Go look." Elias shuffled forward, the crowd parting for him with a reverence that made him feel like a biblical patriarch. He reached the railing. He looked down at the plaque. He ran his thumb over his name carved in the granite. It felt permanent, more permanent than any cabinet or pew he had ever built. Marcus stepped up beside him, leaning his elbows on the railing, looking out over the gorge. "It's a good plaque," Elias grunted, trying to keep his voice steady. "Font's a little fancy, though." Marcus smiled, looking at the horizon. "I designed the layout myself. I figured you'd critique the kerning." "Kerning's fine," Elias admitted. "Spacing is decent." They stood there in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of the cables. "How's the roof holding up?" Elias asked, staring at the river below. 6 months ago, Marcus had finally come to him with the blueprints for his own house, a small A-frame up on the ridge. He had asked Elias to consult on the timber framing. It had been an odd partnership, the digital engineer and the analog carpenter, arguing over load-bearing walls and joinery techniques over endless cups of coffee. It leaked last Tuesday, Marcus confessed. Elias let out a bark of laughter. I told you, the flashing around the chimney. You trusted the sealant tape. I told you to use lead sheets. The tape was rated for 50 years. Marcus protested, though he was grinning. Tape peels, Marcus. Lead settles. How many times do I have to tell you? Gravity always wins eventually. You have to work with it, not trick it. I'm going up there tomorrow to fix it, Marcus said. I bought the lead sheets. Good. Elias nodded. I'll come supervise. From a chair. I'm not climbing any ladders. The ceremony began to break up. The mayor shook hands. The townspeople lingered to touch the plaque, and slowly, the sun began to dip below the rim of the canyon. The light turned golden, setting the bridge on fire with a brilliant, metallic glow. Sarah came over and kissed Elias on the cheek. I'm going to bring the truck around to the far side so you don't have to walk all the way back. You stay here with Marcus. I can walk, Elias protested weakly. You can, Sarah agreed. But you won't. I'll be 10 minutes. She walked away, leaving the two men alone on the span. The wind was getting colder now, dropping down from the peaks, bringing the night with it. Elias gripped his cane with both hands. You know, he said softly, I came out here a few times while you were installing the hydraulics. At night, Marcus looked at him in surprise. You did? I never saw you. I stayed in the truck, Elias said. I wanted to hear it. The new system. And? Marcus asked, a hint of anxiety in his voice. The viscous dampers are top of the line. Fluid matrix. They adjust to the frequency in milliseconds. It's quiet, Elias said. It's smooth. You did good, boy. It doesn't fight the wind anymore. It breathes. Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. That means a lot. Coming from you. Don't let it go to your head. Elias tapped his cane on the asphalt. It's still just a machine. Machines break. Men break. Wood rots. But the lesson sticks, Marcus said. Maybe, Elias murmured. He looked at his hands, the knuckles swollen and gnarled like old roots.
I'm retiring, Marcus.
Selling the shop. The silence stretched between them, heavy and poignant. Marcus turned to look at him, shock registering on his face. Elias, you are the shop. You can't just stop. I can't hold the planer anymore, Elias said simply. There was no self-pity in his voice, just a factual assessment of the material reality. The vibration. It hurts too much. My hands shake. You can't cut a dovetail joint if your hands shake. It's disrespectful to the wood. Marcus looked at the old man's hands. The hands that had saved the town. The hands that had built half the furniture in Oakhaven. He felt a profound sense of loss. What will you do? Teach, Elias said. He looked at Marcus sideways, a twinkle in his eye. I've got this apprentice. Know-it-all kid. Has a fancy degree but can't flash a chimney to save his life. Figure he needs a lot of work. Marcus laughed. A sound that was caught by the wind and carried out over the gorge. I hear his rates are expensive. He pays in coffee and donuts, Elias said. And he drives me to physical therapy. Deal. The sun touched the horizon, and the streetlights along the bridge flickered to life, casting long, rhythmic shadows across the deck. The bridge hummed its low note, a vibration that traveled up through the soles of their boots. Marcus, Elias said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Do you hear it? The wind? No. Underneath that. Marcus closed his eyes. He listened. He heard the wind whistling through the cables, yes. He heard the distant rush of the river. But then, he heard something else. A faint, almost imperceptible creak. It wasn't the screech of metal on metal. It was a soft, organic sound. The sound of the bridge shifting on its bearings, adjusting to the cooling air of the evening. It sounds like, Marcus hesitated. Like a rocking chair, Elias finished. Like a front porch on a summer night. Elias turned to face the vast, darkening expanse of the canyon. He took a deep breath of the cold air, filling his lungs. My grandfather used to say that everything built by man is just a conversation with the earth. Elias said. Most of the time we're shouting. We're blasting rock, pouring concrete, welding steel. We're shouting, I am here. I am strong. He patted the railing of the bridge. But this, Elias smiled. This isn't shouting anymore. It's listening. You taught the steel how to listen, Marcus. Marcus shook his head. You taught me. I just translated it. Same difference. Elias shrugged. Headlights swept across them. Sarah's truck was approaching from the far end, slowing down as it neared. Elias adjusted his hat. Well, ride's here. Can't keep the chariot waiting. He turned to leave, but Marcus reached out and grabbed his arm. It was an impulsive gesture, one of affection and desperation to keep the moment from ending. Elias, Marcus said, thank you. For the bridge, for the roof, for everything. Elias looked down at Marcus's hand on his arm, then up at his face. He saw the respect there, clear and unalloyed. You're welcome, son, Elias said softly. He pulled away gently and limped toward the truck. Sarah leaned across and opened the passenger door. Elias climbed in, the effort making him grimace, but he settled into the seat with a sigh of relief. As the truck pulled away, Elias rolled down the window. He looked back. Marcus was still standing there, a solitary figure illuminated by the artificial glow of the street lamps, framed against the dying light of the sunset. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't checking sensors. He was just standing, one hand on the railing, feeling the pulse of the structure. Elias watched until the figure became a silhouette, and the silhouette became a speck. You happy, Grandpa? Sarah asked, watching the road. Elias rested his hand on the dashboard. He felt the vibration of the old engine, the rattle of the loose glove box, the hum of the tires on the asphalt. It was all vibration. It was all just energy moving through matter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth object. It wasn't the piece of wood from the plaque. It was a simple, polished acorn he had picked up from his yard that morning. He held it in his palm, feeling its potential. A tiny, hard shell containing a future giant. A thing that would one day grow rigid and strong, and then, if it was wise, learn to bend. I'm tired, Sarah, Elias said, closing his fingers over the acorn. But the bridge is standing, and the wind is singing. He closed his eyes and leaned his head back, a small smile playing on his lips. Yeah, he whispered, as the truck carried him home. I'm happy. Behind them, in the deepening twilight, the Silver Creek span stood watch over the gorge. The wind gusted, harder now, pushing against the flank of the structure. The steel did not fight back. It gave, just a fraction of an inch, a graceful, invisible bow to the power of the night, and then, with the resilience of an old oak tree, it swung gently back to center, holding the road, holding the travelers, holding the memory of the grain, forever suspended between the earth and the sky.